You ever wake up to that kind of quiet that feels wrong? Not peaceful, not calm. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach tighten before your eyes even open. That was the morning I realized the HOA had crossed a line they could never uncross. Because when I pulled back my curtains and looked out at my front yard, it wasn't my yard anymore. It was a frozen mountain. A solid, dirty white wall of plowed winter snow dumped overnight like garbage on my property. And that was the moment I stopped being the reasonable homeowner. That was the moment I decided they were going to learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Stay with me, because what happened next shut down their entire street and exposed everything the HOA had been hiding. I live in a quiet neighborhood where rules matter more than people. You know the type. Identical houses, perfect lawns, the same neutral paint colors approved by a committee that meets once a month just to feel powerful. And sitting at the top of that food chain was our HOA board. 3 retirees and 1 wannabe lawyer who thought authority was the same thing as respect. For years, I followed the rules, paid my dues on time, attended meetings, smiled and nodded when they complained about fence heights, mailbox colors, and the angle of my trash cans. But the tension started building the winter I questioned one thing, just one. At a meeting, I asked why snow removal costs had doubled. Not accused, not demanded, just asked. The room went silent. The HOA president smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And from that moment on, I was marked. It started small. Violation notices. My driveway salt usage was excessive. My car was parked too close to the curb, even though it hadn't moved in years. Then came the letters about my yard. In winter, when everything is dead, I pushed back, politely. That's when the plow trucks started showing up differently. Everyone else's snow was cleared neatly to the sides. Mine was shoved forward, closer. Every storm the pile grew, until one night, after the biggest snowfall of the year, they didn't just push it, they dumped it. I stepped outside and immediately slipped. The pile was taller than my fence, dirty, compacted, frozen solid, blocking my driveway, blocking the sidewalk, encroaching onto my lawn by several feet. I stood there in the cold, breath fogging the air, feeling that slow burn behind my ribs. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. I called the HOA office, straight to voicemail. I emailed, no response. Then I checked the community Facebook page, and there it was, a post from the HOA president herself. Snow removal completed successfully. Please remember that snow placement may vary. The comments were turned off. That's when I knew. They thought I'd just accept it. They thought I'd shovel. They thought I'd break my back fixing their mess. They were wrong. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was insulted. They had used my property as a dumping ground, treated my home like overflow storage. And when I realized something else, something important, my anger sharpened into focus. That snow, it didn't belong to them anymore. Once it crossed onto my property line, it became my responsibility, my liability, my problem. And that meant something else too. It was now mine to manage, legally. I checked the bylaws. I checked municipal codes, and I smiled. Because the HOA had made one fatal mistake. They dumped thousands of pounds of snow onto my land without permission, without notice, without authority, which meant whatever happened to that snow next was on them. That night, as temperatures dropped below freezing, I didn't pick up a shovel. I didn't call the lawyer. I didn't send another email. I walked to my garage, turned on the light, and stared at the tools I already owned. Because if the HOA wanted to play games with ice and authority, I was about to show them how quickly a quiet homeowner could turn their own street into a frozen courtroom. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. Anger burns hot and fast. Planning is cold. And by midnight, I had gone completely cold. Outside, the temperature kept dropping.
The snow piled in my yard wasn't just snow anymore. It was compacted ice, layered and dense from repeated plowing. The kind of mass that doesn't melt quickly, the kind of mass that becomes a structure. And that's when the idea fully formed. If the HOA wanted to treat my property like a snow landfill, then I'd treat their street like a controlled environment. I opened my laptop and started reading. Municipal snow codes, HOA bylaws, county liability statutes. And buried deep in the fine print was the rule they were banking on homeowners never understanding. Any snow deposited onto private property becomes the responsibility of the property owner. But there was a second clause they forgot, a clause about redistribution. I was allowed to manage snow on my property in any way that did not damage neighboring private property, obstruct emergency access without cause, or create an artificial hazard beyond existing conditions. Existing conditions. That phrase kept echoing in my head. Because the HOA had already created the hazard, I would simply be preserving it. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about dignity. I had spent years doing everything right, being polite, compliant, invisible. And the moment I questioned their authority, they treated my home like a dumping zone. That kind of power only survives because people back down. I was done backing down. At 1:30 a.m., I went back into the garage. I took inventory. A heavy-duty push shovel, a steel ice chopper, several bags of industrial ice melt, the kind contractors use, not the weak grocery store stuff, and my pride and joy, a gas-powered pressure washer with a heated line. Most people use it to clean driveways. I was about to use it to sculpt ice. Melting snow creates water. Water refreezes, but when water freezes slowly, evenly, it becomes smoother, denser, and far more dangerous than raw snow. I wasn't going to move the pile. I was going to stabilize it, seal it, turn it into something permanent. At 3 a.m., I stepped outside. The street was empty. No cars, no lights, just the hum of distant heaters and the crunch of ice under my boots. I started by shaping the pile. Not removing it, just guiding it, redirecting meltwater runoff toward the curb, toward the street, slowly, deliberately. Then I spread ice melt, not to clear anything, but to control the melt rate. I washed sections with warm water, letting it flow naturally. No barriers, no dams, just gravity. By sunrise, the HOA's street looked normal, but underneath, it was turning into a glassy, frozen sheet. I paused, stood there, asked myself if this was too far. Then I looked back at my yard, buried, unusable, disrespected, and I kept going. By the time the sun came up, I was back inside, coffee in hand, watching through the window. Because the HOA didn't know it yet, but their perfectly maintained street had just become a frozen liability trap, and the first scream was hours away.
The first sound I heard wasn't shouting. It was slipping. A sharp, sudden scrape, rubber against ice, followed by a grunt that carried through the cold morning air. I looked up from my coffee just in time to see my neighbor across the street windmill his arms like a cartoon character before catching himself on a parked car. He stood there frozen, not physically, but mentally, staring down at the street. Because the road looked dry, normal, but it wasn't. It was a lie. Black ice is deceptive. You don't see it, you discover it, and the HOA's street was becoming a perfect sheet of it. Meltwater from my snow pile had flowed exactly where gravity wanted it, toward the crown of the road, then outward, freezing evenly as the temperature hovered just below zero. No puddles, no piles, just a smooth, continuous glaze. And the best part? It blended seamlessly with the rest of the street. No warning signs, no cones, because the HOA didn't know yet. By 7:30 a.m., doors began opening, cars started, engines revved, and one by one, they slid. Nothing dramatic at first, just hesitation, careful steps. A woman laughed nervously as she shuffled sideways toward her SUV. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" I watched it all from my window, heart pounding, not with excitement, but with anticipation.
because this was no longer theoretical, it was real. At exactly 8:02 a.m., she appeared. Perfect coat, perfect scarf, phone already in her hand. She stepped off the curb confidently and immediately went down. Not hard, but hard enough. Her phone skidded across the road, spinning to a stop near the storm drain. She sat there for a moment, stunned. Then the anger came. You could see it in the way she stood up too fast, in the way she looked around not to check if she was okay, but to see who had witnessed it. And then her eyes landed on my house. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered calmly. "Did you do something to the street?" she demanded. No greeting, no professionalism, just accusation. I looked outside at the untouched snow pile in my yard. "I managed the snow on my property," I said. "That's not what I asked," she snapped. "That's exactly what you asked." Silence. Then, "You're creating a hazard." I took a breath. "The hazard was created when snow was dumped on my property without consent," I said. "I haven't moved anything off my land." Her voice dropped, cold. "We'll be discussing this." I smiled. "I look forward to it." By mid-morning, 2 cars had minor fender scrapes, nothing serious, yet. The HOA posted an emergency notice blaming unexpected weather conditions. Residents responded with photos, videos, slipping mail carriers, a delivery truck stuck sideways across the road. The comments exploded. And for the first time ever, the HOA didn't turn them off, because they were panicking. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt calm, steady, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't even the worst of it. Temperatures were dropping again that night, hard. Whatever water hadn't frozen yet was about to. At 4:47 p.m., someone knocked, hard. I opened the door to find 2 HOA board members standing there, red-faced, furious, slipping slightly on my walkway. "You need to fix this," one of them said. I gestured behind me. "My property is still blocked." "That's not the issue," the other snapped. I leaned against the doorframe. "Funny," I said. "It wasn't an issue when you dumped it." They threatened fines, legal action, emergency powers. I listened patiently, then closed the door. That night, the temperature plunged to its lowest point of the season, and somewhere around midnight, I heard sirens, slow, careful, sliding, because the street had officially become impassable, and the HOA was about to realize they'd frozen themselves into a corner.
The screaming didn't start with the HOA. It started with a driver. A man late for work, tires spinning uselessly as his sedan slid sideways and kissed the curb with a dull, hollow thud. He slammed his steering wheel, yelled something unintelligible, and that was the spark. Because once one person loses it, everyone else feels permission to do the same. By 6:15 a.m., flashing lights painted the frozen street red and blue. Police cars moved like they were tiptoeing, slow, cautious, afraid of their own momentum. An ambulance stopped 2 houses down after nearly sliding through an intersection. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The street that prided itself on order had become chaos. They showed up as a group, the president, the treasurer, the wannabe lawyer, all standing in the road arguing loudly while officers watched with thinly veiled irritation. "This is a safety emergency," the president shrieked, waving her arms. An officer gestured at the ice beneath her feet. "Ma'am, I need you to step back onto the sidewalk." She slipped. Again. The neighbors saw everything. Phones were out, recording, because authority looks very different when it's screaming on ice. That's when they pointed at my house, all at once. "He did this. He manipulated the snow. He's sabotaging the street." The officer looked at me, calm, professional. "Sir, did you move snow from your property onto the roadway?" I answered clearly, "No." "Did you obstruct the street?" "No." "Did you redirect water artificially?" "No. I allowed natural melt from snow illegally dumped on my property." The officer raised an eyebrow. The HOA president went nuclear. "That's semantics!" she screamed. The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "semantics are the law." Someone shouted from the sidewalk. "Why was his yard used as a dump?" Another voice. "You doubled our snow budget." Another. "My kid fell this morning."
The HOA tried to talk over them. They couldn't. Once a crowd realizes it's been lied to, you don't get the room back. I went inside, came back out with a folder, printed emails, violation notices, photos of the snow pile being dumped, time-stamped. I handed them to the officer, then deliberately to the HOA president. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't just ice anymore. It was evidence. She screamed, not metaphorically, actually screamed. "You're doing this on purpose!" I nodded. I'm responding appropriately. The officer stepped between us. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm now, "you need to calm down." She didn't. That's when everything changed. The city arrived. Public works, heavy trucks, salt spreaders. They shut down the street. Officially, no through traffic, no HOA authority, municipal control. And the first thing the supervisor asked, who authorized snow dumping on private property? No one answered. I felt it then. Not joy, relief. Because the weight I'd been carrying, years of compliance, silence, swallowing disrespect, cracked and slid away like ice under salt. I wasn't invisible anymore, and neither were they. As the trucks worked, the HOA president locked eyes with me. Hatred, fear, and something else. Realization. Because she finally understood what the ice had done. It hadn't just frozen the street, it had frozen her power.
When the ice finally began to break apart under the city's salt trucks, something else broke with it. The noise, the shouting, the illusion that the HOA was still in control. By noon, the street was slushy and scarred, striped with gray salt lines like battle wounds. But the damage was already done, and everyone could feel it. 2 days later, envelopes appeared. Not HOA letters, city letters, certified, stamped, addressed to the HOA board. Violation of municipal snow disposal ordinances, unauthorized obstruction of private property, failure to mitigate a known hazard. Each line item carried a fine. Each fine carried a deadline, and none of it could be appealed away with attitude. The HOA called an emergency meeting, mandatory attendance, standing room only. People who'd never shown up before filled the clubhouse. I sat in the back, quiet, watching. The president tried to open with procedure. She didn't get past the first sentence. "What about the fines?" someone shouted. "Why was his yard used?" another demanded. "Why are our dues paying for lawyers now?" The wannabe lawyer board member spoke up and immediately made it worse. He used words like standard practice and implied consent. The room erupted. Implied consent to dump tons of snow onto someone's property, without notice, without permission, without cleanup. That phrase alone sealed their fate. I stood. The room went quiet, not because they respected me, because they wanted answers. I asked one question about the budget, and this was the response. I held up photos, letters, timelines. This wasn't weather, it was retaliation. You could feel it land. Heavy, undeniable. The treasurer spoke first, voice shaking. I didn't approve this. Then the secretary. Then, finally, the president. She didn't apologize. She announced she was stepping down, effective immediately. The room didn't clap. It exhaled. Insurance got involved. Claims, injury reports, vehicle damage. The HOA's policy premiums skyrocketed. Special assessments were proposed, voted down. Lawsuits were threatened, some filed. And suddenly, every decision they'd ever made was under a microscope. The violations against me? Withdrawn. Every one. My driveway? Cleared professionally, with photos sent for confirmation. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, like someone had finally acknowledged something I'd known all along, that respect isn't granted by titles, it's maintained by fairness. Weeks later, as winter faded, a new notice appeared on the community board, an announcement, new elections, revised bylaws, and a line that made me pause. Homeowner participation strongly encouraged, because the story wasn't over yet. It was just
changing hands.
Spring arrived quietly. No announcements, no meetings, no warnings taped to doors. The snow melted, the ice disappeared, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt human. You could still see the scars if you knew where to look. Cracked asphalt, uneven patches where emergency salt had eaten into the road. Every mark told the same story, not of winter, but of arrogance. People slowed down when they drove past my house, not out of fear, out of memory. The new HOA board didn't strut. They didn't posture. They listened. Meetings became discussions instead of interrogations. Rules were explained, not weaponized. And for the first time, the phrase homeowners' rights was spoken without sarcasm. One afternoon, a knock at my door. Not aggressive, not official. The former treasurer stood there, hands in pockets, eyes down. "I should have spoken up," he said. "No excuses, just honesty." I nodded. Sometimes that's enough. The HOA didn't just lose power, it lost blind obedience. People started reading bylaws, asking questions, showing up, because they'd seen what happens when no one does. I didn't become louder, I became clearer. I learned that standing your ground doesn't require shouting, it requires preparation, documentation, and the willingness to let the truth sit where everyone can see it. The HOA revised its snow policy. In bold letters, "Snow shall never be deposited on private property without written consent." That line existed because of one pile, one decision, one moment when someone decided they'd had enough. If you're watching this and dealing with an HOA that thinks power means punishment, remember this: they only win when you stay quiet. Know your rules, know your rights, and don't let anyone turn your home into their dumping ground, because sometimes all it takes is letting the ice tell the truth. The street eventually thawed, but the lesson? That stayed frozen in their memory.